Welcome. Welcome to our global edition of Radio Evolve. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I'm happy to have with me Martin Winiecki. Martin, great to have you on Radio Evolve.
Thanks for having me.
Martin, you are a networker, author, activist. You're born in Germany. You have been politically engaged since many years. You're the director of the Institute for Global Peace Work in Tamera, and you do peace research and education in Tamera, Portugal. And you think a lot about our difficult, dramatic global situations that we are in. You are having soon, in fact in a week, a seminar that you called Systems Change and Pathways to post-capitalism. So not many people, when they talk about the crisis that we're in, use this term capitalism and post-capitalism the way you do it. It more sounds like a word used 40 years ago when there was this left-right movement, and capitalism, post-capitalism was the conversation. Let me start our conversation with, in a few words, when somebody is asking you, what do you think, Martin, is the main important features of this crisis that we are in? How would you describe it? What would you highlight is the nature of this crisis?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Thomas, and hello to everybody, first of all. I would say the essential nature of the crisis is a fundamental contradiction or a clash between two different systems. Systems are evolving, adaptive, self-organizing entities. And what we are seeing, and which results in a global ecological crisis and climate breakdown, but also in social crises, in extreme social inequality, in wars, is the clash or is the contradiction between the logic of globalized capitalism, which is the algorithm that steers the way goods circulate, information circulates, how billions of people behave, and the logic of living systems on this planet, which is regenerative, circular, actually based on cooperation. And capitalism, yeah, I use the term because I think even though we might not talk about it anymore, it is the overarching kind of economic framework that holds together, or that is the frame in which all the oppression, the exploitation that we are seeing in the world, and that is at the root of these crises, is originating from. And so I think it is very important to speak about post-capitalism, because especially we live in a time when capitalism has kind of colonized itself until the last corner of the planet. It has defeated all its enemies. The Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek, he said, it is now easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. So I think in many ways, the fact that we don't talk about post-capitalism is the result of the extent to which capitalism is controlling not just the world externally, but even the way we think, our subconscious reactions. It has penetrated very deeply into our lives.
When you say that it has deeply penetrated into our lives, what do you have in mind? What is it? How does it show up in our mind? How does it live in our minds? Because that's different than talking about profits and employers and employees. You said it's penetrating our minds. So how does it show up there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, every system I believe, works fractally. So it's like what we see as the superstructure politically, economically out in the world is reflected in the way how every kind of sub organism within that structure works, all the way down to the way people interact, their personal lives. And I think what is very crucial for sustaining systems that require oppression and exploitation and war are beliefs and myths that people internalize, and that and through which they justify operating with and being complicit within those systems. And I mean, capitalism is based on several foundational myths. One is the whole idea of individualism, the idea that I mean, as Margaret Thatcher, she famously said that there is no such thing as society. There are only individuals and families who have to take care of themselves. So there is this idea that we are separate individuals, and that the world is made out of stuff, out of things that are in and of itself inanimate. And another idea is that the purpose of life is to accumulate those things in a basically meaningless universe. This is what gives us meaning. So wealth is virtue. And there's also the idea that hierarchy is fundamental to the way how the world is set up. So there is a division of the world in inferiors and superiors, those deserving power and privilege and wealth, and those who don't. And these are thought forms that we have internalized and that we carry, even if we consider ourselves, no matter where we consider ourselves on the political spectrum, even if we consider ourselves being outside of the capitalist space, and then people who come together with this conditioning will end up co-creating this the basics of the system from the way they interact. And so, I mean, one thing is the whole idea of ownership, and I mean, we have it in the moment we feel scarcity. We want to secure something for ourselves. I mean, ownership takes place in our relationships. And this is what I mean. It has conditioned us on a very subtle level, and it is so widespread, so collective, that the pathology of it isn't even recognized anymore.
The two things I would like to hone into to start with. One is what you called the myth of individuality, because on one hand, I think many people will agree and see, yeah, this is this kind of separate self identity, there's something problematic about it. On the other hand, there is also something that seems to be very powerful and important, our individual capacity to be here, to be responsible, to be self-reliable, that we are not just part of our tribe, not just part of our tradition, that we have our own individual capacity of reason and capacity of critique, all that which is the positive outcome also of European Enlightenment in that sense. When you say the myth of the individual as being part of the root, what are you particularly talking about?
I'm talking about the Cartesian worldview, where our experience and understanding of reality is fundamentally shaped by a division, a duality between the subject that perceives the world and the object that the world is. So this fundamental, this belief in a fundamental separation. Because I agree that there is, I mean, when you look at the root of the word individual, it means undivided. So I think if we go to the depths of the core of who we are, we find something that is undivided. But that doesn't mean that it is separate. It is to the opposite. I think if we go to the very root of our so-called individual existence, we find a ground where we will find that this separation between the subject that perceives and the object that is perceived doesn't actually exist. And I think it is important to, I mean, if you understand, if you follow the logical train of this Cartesian worldview, where, I mean, it is that human consciousness is to be seen as the, or the human brain is to be seen as the only place where actually consciousness exists. And so of course, if then you see the world as fundamentally separate from you, it is clear that from there, ideas of scarcity, of ownership, of oppression, of competition, they will all seem actually quite sensible, quite reasonable, in fact.
It's also interesting because in one way it comes down to a very simple experience, and it has to do with separation and relationship. Do we experience each other mainly to be in competition or in relation? And it's okay to. I think it's obvious that some or both is the case. But what's the fundamental relationship? Like even having the conversation that we are right now, are we competing about something? Who has the better point here, or are we together in something, in relationship? And this fundamental mythology, as you put it, of selfhood, that I experience myself in competition with the other, or in relationship, in cooperation with the other, forms a whole world reality that I guess the point you're making, this is a system called capitalism that also kind of enforces this, but it's living in us, that I experience the world mainly as being a separate identity competing with everything and everyone. And that is how something like capitalism lives in me, in my soul. Is that the point?
Yeah, and I would also say that what makes a system is its capacity to kind of coherently combine different areas of our lives. So yes, it is the mythology, it is the beliefs that we have internalized, through which, like, yeah, let's say the belief in competition or this kind of separate individualism, but it is also it is the economic and social realities that reinforce those kinds of beliefs. And I think another important layer that people are more and more waking up to now is the reality of trauma, is the reality of the wounds from history and from the way we've grown up, the lack of attachment, the lack of authentic expression, through which we already kind of enter the world kind of feeling broken, feeling alone. And then in that wounded state, we come in contact with beliefs that make the whole story seem natural, seem just the way the world is. And through us adopting those beliefs, the system is kind of locked within us. It's there is a mechanism that kind of milks our neuroses and keeps us going in the system and never actually doubt what is going on. Very much like the people in Plato's cave.
There's also something about what you call system reality, and let's say system reality versus relationship. Because there's something in this system reality, particularly in capitalism, where everything in the end comes down to calculable realities. It's all in the end put into numbers. And system thinking in the end has a lot to do with a mathematical understanding of reality as something that somehow works up as a whole complex system that you can calculate. But there's something like empathy, which at least is difficult to calculate. Or let's put it that way: if you calculate, maybe it's not empathy, but it's relationship. And to see that we are all in relationship, there's also some indigenous worldview coming in. I and all my relationships, and usually indigenous cultures mean that not only my family, my country, but they talk also about plants and sky and earth as relationship. But that already, when I go with this, opens up a different world reality that is different than what our modern thinking creates as a system reality. Something it's maybe a little overstated, but there's a truth to it. Something is very cold on one side, and on the other side there's a warmth that is important.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think this is part of the kind of rational mind, where unless something can be calculated or measured, it doesn't actually exist. And I think, I mean, we are seeing how problematic this is on all kinds of different levels, where kind of until scientists can measure the ecological value of a certain species or ecosystem, it is not seen as relevant. And so we have, in the whole climate debate, for example, we have this excessive focus on carbon, which, I mean, is right, and still we are not seeing, the intricate relevance of so many things that so many species do in an ecosystem context. And yeah, we are seeing the kind of results of the loss of ability to perceive the value of relationships. Like it is directly reflected in the way we are wounding the world, actually, because we are disoriented. We are chasing abstract values, while the real value is, as you say, it is relational. But I also want to say that I said it, I mentioned it before, that living systems or the living world is also following systems. And as you mentioned, empathy, this is not just a sentimental or emotional quality, but it is, I believe, if we think in terms of wholeness, if we see the world as an interdependent relational web, then there is a deep logic to the existence of empathy. For example, there is like empathy is almost an existential or ontological quality, where it is because I can perceive the other almost as it was myself, and I can, and through this channel, kind of feel our interconnectedness. This will inform me to be a responsible member of that whole. And so so there is deep meaning in that as well. And I think there is, like, we are so much conditioned, especially in the West, through this through rationalist logic, that there is easily also here kind of a value judgment of, like, oh yeah, but it's just relational, it's just empathy, where actually there is, I think the logic within the living world is so much deeper than that of the kind of mechanistic, it's in a very, very shallow logic as well.
Maybe this is also the systems change that you're talking about. Because listening to you, what comes up to me, on one hand, the capacity to see our living systems, as you're saying, relatedness. And on the other hand, came the image, very simple, of the stock market. And also not necessarily blaming anyone, but just seeing the stock market as a system that is ruling us. And that's very obvious, that how the world works is dependent on stock markets, but it's calculable. And there's something in living realities that follows a different logic than the stock market logic in that. And am I right when you're talking about systems change, that there's something where the living reality of our relatedness comes up to the foreground, and whatever we have as a rational scientific reality, I think that's important. I guess you're not kind of saying that this is in itself a bad thing, but that it is coming into service of something where we are aware of a different way of relatedness than the stock market can see.
Yeah, I mean, for me, if I had to say it in one word, I think the system change, or in one sentence, the system change is realigning or aligning human systems with the systems of the living world. And in that, there is an important, I mean, we could say Gnostic shift, in in the way we perceive the world, in worldview. And I agree, like it's not that I think the rational worldview or the Western world is just like it's completely meaningless in and of itself. But I think it is important for us to, like, as part of kind of examining the way we understand the world, it is important to ask ourselves, what do we believe to be base reality? And if we think that kind of the materialist mechanist paradigm is base reality, then it will inform the way we perceive and make sense and respond to the world in a certain way. But we can also have a different understanding, I would say a deeper understanding of base reality, and then still the mechanistic laws will apply to a certain part of reality, but it will not be the fundamental principle. And I think, yeah.
Just ask me what in the end maybe is the basic question. I think hardly anyone will disagree with what you're saying, but it's easy to say that what you're bringing has some naivete, meaning, yeah, it would be great if to have this heartfelt relationship on a global scale, but basically that's not how global reality works. Global reality works through these abstract systems of bureaucracy and market logics that in the reality that we are living, that's basically what we have to work with. The systems change that you're talking about is a beautiful dream, but it never will hold reality, because in that complex world that we're living, we have to live with the logic of these market logics that we have created, and everything else is beautiful, but it's naive. Mm-hmm. How would you respond?
Yeah, I think you're just describing another myth of capitalism, which is, I think it was also even from Margaret Thatcher, this sentence of there is no alternative. Like this is the basic mantra, which, by the way, is like a trademark of totalitarian systems. The claim to kind of, to be the crown of history, to be without meaningful competition. And I think that capitalism, in this claim for universality, for being the perfect system, also has really created a crisis of imagination. The people's minds are so locked within a certain mantra, certain key phrases that must never be questioned. I mean, every government at the core of their policies in economy is about improving the conditions and raising economic growth. And it's funny, this whole talk about being realistic, because when you look at economic growth in the context of our planet's ecology, capitalism demands at least 3% GDP growth every year. That means a doubling of the global economy every 20 years. And if you look at the planetary boundaries that we've crossed, I think by now the International Panel on Climate Change talks about 14 climate-related feedback loops, meaning like we are already entering into kind of non-linear climate breakdown, which pushes ever more the prospect of societal collapse. It really dares the question, like, what is realistic? Like, do we think of something realistic? Again, what is the basic framework? What is base reality? Is base reality capitalism, with a life where we plug our electricity from the get our electricity from the plug, our water from the tap, our foods from the supermarkets, or is base reality the living world from which we were born? And so I think there is a deep realistic need to get off this train as soon as possible, and to think about how do we disentangle ourselves, untether ourselves from a self-terminating mechanism, which is global capitalism. It's for me very, like, there's no doubt about where this is going. and there is very I mean, the evidence is very clear about where we are heading, and it is very funny to speak about realism in this context.
Also, in relationship what you said about the lack of imagination, the last issue of our Evolve magazine, we titled the market myth, and we had a very for me powerful interview with an Austrian economist who basically made the point that the main myth of our time right now is the market myth. And what he pointed to in that sense, that all qualities that we used to give God in traditional times, which is all-knowing and almighty, we now give to this entity called market. And the market has this quality that you just described, that it's quantifying everything, it's making everything into profit logics, and as you are claiming, and that's also a point that I really find cool. It has the old, again, godlike demand. You cannot have a God next to me. Basically saying, if the market is almighty and all-knowing, I am not allowed to have an imagination, because basically I have to obey. Because the real one who knows is not me, it's this thing called market that tells us how we have to envision our society. I'm not allowed to have an imagination. If that's the case, politics, and that's our reality, is not allowed to have any imagination. It has to follow the logic. So basically, politics is by nature powerless, because the setting is already that the only one who can tell what politics is allowed to do is this one entity, godlike entity called market, and we just have to listen, because nobody of us is the market. That in itself is basically making anything like human collaboration, police working together, making decisions together, having visions together, powerless. This system takes away any form of the capacity to imagine that maybe we want to do something that's not as profitable as something else is, but we want to do it anyway because we want it, and because it seems to be, there are good arguments that this is better to do. So in that sense, this myth of the market has the same power like an old god had, that it really dominates our thinking, our feeling, and does not allow any imagination of a different alternative reality that we could create together.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, my friend Alnor Lada, he says that in a way neoliberalism is a form of theology, and you just described parts of it, and people don't realize, because it is so much based on a kind of rationalist, scientific way of understanding the world, that the theological aspect of it and how much it is a belief system kind of gets missed. But I also in a way want to invert what you said about imagination, because I think imagination is also a very powerful way, a powerful vehicle for initiating system change. Mm-hmm. So in a world where or in a time where kind of people cannot conceive of a different world, activating our imagination in a way is a revolutionary act. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a deep point, because I mean, there are, when you look into different spiritual traditions, or even when you look at the philosophical implications of quantum physics, we understand that our way of seeing the world isn't just passive. You know, it is part of our relation with the world. So as quantum physics as quantum physicists realized, that the observer is involved, is in a relationship with that which he observes, And so I find it very beautiful, for example, when some of the Persian Sufi texts were translated some decades ago by a French researcher, Henry Corbin, and he realized he had to coin a new term because he couldn't just translate the way the Sufis were framing imagination as imaginary, but he coined the term imaginel to signify that through our imagination, we are actually co-creating reality. And so it is also like understanding the way how capitalism and different systems of oppression have trapped us in a dead end of imagination. I think this realization is also the starting point of a different possibility. And so and for me, this is also a striking experience that that I have had time and again, both kind of in spiritual experiences alone, but also in experiences in relation with other people or other beings, that this vision of a post-capitalist existence or pre-capitalist memories of pre-capitalist existences, a state of being where we are, where we realize our interdependence with our life, where you know, we freely want to give, where we see ourselves as part of a web of connectedness, that this is actually much more real, much more true to who we are than the realities that we have that we have accepted as real from our socialization. And so, yeah, I just wanted to kind of underline what you said about imagination.
No, I really find it very fascinating, and also the way you put it, that imagination is a revolutionary act, and also in the differentiation that you brought from this French thinker Henri Corbin, and this differentiation that he brings in between the imaginary and the imaginal, because usually that's exactly how the story goes. You imagine it's just fantasy, it's nice. But the point that he is making, I think that it is worth pursuing if there's something to it, that there's a form of imagination that's not just making things up. It's a differentiated form of seeing a subtle reality possibility that is beyond just usual forms of reasoning. There's something where imagination sees possibilities together that form our reality. And it's also, I think, important to see that everything, including our scientific worldview, is based on imaginations. Because we pretend like our modernist worldview is just based on kind of calculating things. That's a mechanism of it, but there is no world reality that's not based on the imagination. Even science as a system is something we imagined as a possibility. So to see the power of imagination as a deep human power, and to liberate it again against just calculating things as a revolutionary act, as you put it, is maybe also one, when we're talking about system change, this could be one of the liberating forms where system change is opening up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in a way, without imagination of the world that we want to live in, that we want to move towards, we will just, like, activism will just end up being kind of in a fighting mode, doing ping pong with the existing system. And on the other hand, if groups of people, movements, maybe even global networks of movements can actually see this, as you said, like this seeing as a way of tapping into a latent reality of what is possible, then there is a lot of energy that we can mobilize, also how we can cohere together towards this aim, which otherwise is not available to us. So I think imagination really informs us in many ways. Also, is what gives us courage, is what allows us to persevere. It is a very strong power. And I also think it is important that also here we kind of go out of the individualistic conditioning where so much of the modern day kind of spiritual literature is so kind of focused on trying to help individuals kind of become better in how we survive capitalism. But actually, I think there is a particular power of imagination, of vision, when it is held in groups of people that learn to be more and more coherent, both in the vision that they hold and also in how they move together towards it. I think this is, I think like there is such a strong wound of separation between people, such a strong default now of an atomized existence, that I think it is hard for us to imagine, speaking of imagination, the depth of communal embedment and shared existence that we are talking about when talking about post-capitalism. Actually, in a way, I believe the antidote to capitalism isn't socialism or communism. It is community. It is this deep sense of being in relation with the world again. And so I think it is important also to, like, as we hold the vision, to hold it kind of in a way that resonates with that vision.
And this community, it's also the capacity. One doesn't dare to say it because it sounds so romantic. To dare to dream together. And again, of course, there's this danger, and one has to be very careful. Their dream is just a dream, a pipe dream. But maybe there's something that is imagination is really showing us in this imagining together how we want to live together. There's a deep, heartfelt community already in that. When we come together in imagining how we want to be together, this is already a community. And there's also a force opening up between us. There's a love force in this imagining together how we in small communities, in big communities, but also in global communities, how do we want to do this together, whatever this is. And to be in this way with each other creates different relationships, because undeniably there's a love force just in opening this question and meeting in this question. And that's beyond calculating things. It's beyond the competing things. There's something that's bringing us together. Again, one has to be very careful, as I see it, to not get lost in pipe dreams, whatever, to be very thorough, scientific, rational, but not deny your heart, not deny our connections. And that, it seems, where you see these transition points. There's something that is not communism, socialism, but it's community opening up in the way we talk together, by the way, as we do right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think also community is not like community is not so much a noun, but more a verb. Like it is the way we kind of are in the world. And I think like a way of thinking about the system change is kind of to see it as kind of rooted in what I would call like 3 pillars of human culture. And we talked a lot now about one of them, which is kind of the way we perceive the world, our relation to the universe. We could refer to it as gnosis, the knowing the inside of the world, and also there are like the 2 other are the relation between beings, between humans, but also between humans and all other beings. You know, it needs to be freed from the logic of separation, of competition, of commodification, and aligned with principles of truth, of solidarity, interdependent care for one another. And this is where, yeah, I think this is where what you call then as refer to as pipe dream kind of is grounded in an actual relational experience where we begin to naturally support each other because we feel our relation. Like this is there's a shift in the quality of our lives where kind of the idea of community becomes a mode of being. And so this is the second pillar, eros, the relation between beings, which also includes the sensual relations between our bodies, our sexuality. It is all part in that relational tissue. And coming out of a capitalist and also patriarchal era, it is fraught with trauma, with pain, with defenses, protections, because there is a pain here that is hard to handle. And yeah, and I believe while therapy is necessary, it in the end, oftentimes necessary, I believe in the end it is through creating these communities where people are really not alone anymore, where we hold each other in our existence, where this trauma can be released. And I want to mention also the third one, because because this is something that can also get lost, especially in kind of alternative spiritual circles where we talk a lot about spiritual and the relational. And this is kind of the bringing it back down to the material level, to our economic arrangements, the way we make decisions. So the police, you already mentioned this word, our relation to place. Because it is also like this is, I mean, there I appreciate Marx with his understanding of how much it is social realities and the material relation, the relations of production that also determine our consciousness. Maybe I wouldn't use the word determine, but rather inform. And still there is truth to, like, you know, if we continue to, we can create a community of trauma healing and all of this, and still if we stay in a commodity logic when it comes to economics, or in a top-down hierarchical logic when it comes to decision making, we are still kind of complicit in the mainstream narrative. And so I think that in order to make system change, and then also in order to restore community, we have to kind of address these three pillars simultaneously. And because if we only focus on one, for example, we will be undermined in our efforts through our complicity in the system, in the others that we haven't addressed. So there is really something capitalism is so complex in the way it is set up that it hits us time and again through the complexity. So there's really a call for creating complex adaptive systems that can appreciate kind of the wholeness, the holistic character of our existence on these different planes.
Great. I guess this is also what you will go into in your course that's upcoming. You just want to mention when this course starts and how, if people are interested, can sign up, go there.
Yeah, exactly. We will talk in depth about these three areas, and the course will start on the 21st, next Friday, 8 days from now. It will consist of 6 webinars that will happen Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that weekend and the weekend after, of 2 hours. Will take place in the evening for people in Europe. And yeah, you can sign up in the link that is, I believe, provided in the description. And I'm also excited to announce that there will be a guest speaker for at least one of the webinars, which is Alnor Lada, I already mentioned, who is a brilliant systems thinker and activist. And I believe that is it.
Cool. Martin, we are also at the end of our time. It was great to talk to you as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you as well. I really appreciate our dialogue.
Very enjoyed also going together in this. It's a collective investigation also that we're doing to find out how to find this transition. And I really enjoy very much what you're providing here. Thank you so much for that.